And we're joined again by Labor MP Stephen Jones. Dan Tehan, Liberal MP, hasn't been able to make it. Stephen, Dan Tehan was talking about foreign investment. You have an electorate which has industry in it. How do you think your voters view foreign investment?
Well, I think at large people might feel that they're a little bit uncomfortable with the notion of foreign investment. But when you give them an example, as I can, about a mine within my electorate which was on the brink of being liquidated, owned by one company. You had another investor from India very interested in the mine. They've come in, they've recapitalised it, they're getting it back up and running. That's 500 jobs and another 500 creditors are going to get paid. When you're able to draw a concrete example about how concrete foreign investments can make a difference to their livelihoods and to the wealth of the nation, I think they feel a lot more comfortable with it. And that story is true the world around. Australia has always relied on foreign investment for every year but one to ensure that we can be a prosperous and productive nation.
Both sides of politics, though, have reacted to concerns from the community, from their electorates, about foreign investment. How much pressure do politicians feel when a decision comes up, is potentially controversial and involves foreign investment? Yeah,
look, of course there's pressure, and that's why you have a set of principles, particularly around the national interest, and there will be areas where there is a national interest in ensuring that we have certain ownership structures in place. We've gone through a recent debate around the role of Huawei, for example, in the NBN contracting arrangements. Clear national interest issues arose there. I think as members of Parliament, as political leaders, we have a responsibility to show leadership and explain in concrete terms what a difference it makes to the nation, and not get into the fear-peddling bandwagon that we've seen, particularly from the National Party, I've got to say, in this area. I think we've all got an obligation to point out that with foreign investment comes jobs, comes productivity, comes industry, comes investment in the country, and that's something that we're all looking for.
Do you think the current controls of foreign investment, the threshold at which a foreign investment proposal is reviewed, are about right?
Oh, look, we can always have a look at that. I don't think it hurts, every few years to run a comb over some of these things and see whether they're appropriate to, the current environment and what's going on. But I haven't seen anything to date which causes me to be alarmed about what's going on. If there's fresh evidence which would cause me to change my view, of course I would.
Now, there's another ceiling being discussed at the moment. That's the government's proposal to increase to $500 billion the debt ceiling. Your side of politics says you say yes to $400 billion, but not $500 billion. Why not?
Because we are applying to the government the same test that they applied to us when they were in opposition. What they said to us, and let's not forget they voted against every single one of our propositions to raise the debt ceiling. What they said to us is, if you want to increase the debt ceiling, you've got to be transparent about it. Where's your MyEFO? Where's your budget update? Be transparent about the books. And we were. We're applying the same test to Joe Hockey. This is what you demanded of us. We're demanding of the same thing to you. And let's be clear about this. Joe Hockey's out there briefing members of the Federal Press Gallery saying, well, we actually don't need $500 billion. It's actually closer to $400 billion that we need. Well, if it's only $400 billion that you really need, that's where we'll go to. We're willing to vote for that, and we'll amend the bill in the House. But if you need more, explain why. And when we're talking about $100 billion, I don't think that's unreasonable.
But the current ceiling of $300 billion is expected to be reached by the end of the year. There will need to be some movement upwards before the Parliament rises, won't there?
And that is acknowledged by the Labor position that says we will vote for a move to $400 billion, and we will do that within this session of Parliament. So there's no question that any budget emergency could occur because of the position we're taking. But if you want us to go further, explain to us, explain to the Australian people why it's necessary.
Is there an element of politics about this, that the government might be wanting a big increase now so it doesn't have to come back to Parliament for another increase should it be needed in the future? You'd like the government to come to Parliament with each incremental increase as Labor did, and maybe have the government wear some political pain for that. Is that reasonable?
I have absolutely no doubt that there is politics in what the government is doing, but the role of an opposition is to keep the government government to account. And what better way to keep a government to account to say, if you want an extra $100 billion above what you say you need, explain why.
The other issue that the government is dealing with is the question of asylum seekers, a fraught one for Labor. The government says, the Immigration Minister says, the government is not negotiating a people swap deal, as was suggested by a spokeswoman for the Indonesian, as an Indonesian government official. It's simply dealing with what happens to asylum seekers rescued by Australian ships in Indonesia's search and rescue zone. Now, Indonesia has twice allowed the asylum seekers to go back into Indonesia. More recently, though, it said no on 2 occasions. Is it fair enough for the government to be able to have these negotiations without talking about them endlessly to the media and then inform the public the end result of those?
Well, I think the government's brought this circumstance upon themselves by doing 2 things. Firstly, spending several years poking the Indonesians in the eye. Is it any wonder that they respond? Secondly, by the ridiculous cloak of secrecy that they've put around everything that's going on in this portfolio area. No, Lyndal, it's absolutely ridiculous that we are finding out more from the Indonesian media about what's going on in negotiations between Australia and senior officials inside Indonesia than we do from Scott Morrison, our own minister. There's one simple thing that Scott Morrison could do, and that is to keep the Australian people informed. So if there's speculation and uncertainty arising out of what's going on, it's speculation and uncertainty which has been created by his own secret actions, his own refusal to be transparent on this.
The government keeps pointing to the upcoming Indonesian presidential elections as a sign there may be some politicking going on behalf of Indonesia. Now, it is not unknown.
That's something that the government would know a lot about, because they spent
it's not unknown in Australia, is it?
3 years politicking around the issue of refugees and immigration, so they would know a lot about that.
So does Indonesia's response have to be seen in that light?
Well, look, there's no doubt that domestic political circumstances are going to factor the way any government responds to these sorts of issues. But look, the real issue here is that the government's been hoisted on its own petard. They spent 3 years substituting policy with 3-word slogans. They're now in government. The 3-word slogans are falling apart. They have not introduced one new measure, not one new measure, into their refugee suite of policies since when we left government, and is there any wonder that there's the sort of speculation and uncertainty about what's going on?
On that note, Stephen James, thank you very much for joining us.
Good to be with you.